fear of being cold. That is probably the #1 thing that keeps most people from winter camping. And sure, you could buy a -1 billion degree sleeping bag and all the nicest gear, but even then you're still missing something really simple that makes a big difference. So much so, I believe it is the key to safe and warm winter camping. And I'm going to tell you exactly how you can do it, and you might be able to do it with gear you already have. Let's check it out. Okay, so let's assume that you don't have a few $100s to drop on a 0 degree or colder sleeping bag that you might only use 1 to 2 times a year anyways. That's okay, because you can actually stay warm at the same or even colder temperatures by simply layering quilts. Okay, so let's assume that you've got a -30 degree quilt like this one from Enlightened Equipment. It's good for spring and fall backpacking down to just about freezing, but it's not going to get you into the colder months. But let's assume that your partner also happens to have a 30 degree quilt like this one from Katabatic Gear. What a lot of people don't realize, you can actually layer these two quilts to get down to about -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Look, the only difference between a 30 degree sleeping bag and a 0 degree is the amount of insulation. By layering or stacking two quilts, you are essentially doubling your insulation. Now, it's important to do this with at least one quilt. Don't try to do it with 2 sleeping bags, because insulation works by lofting. And if you try to cram a sleeping bag inside of another sleeping bag, there isn't going to be enough room for the inner bag to loft. It's just going to get compressed, reducing its warmth. So you can do this with 2 quilts, or you can do it with a sleeping bag with a quilt on top. But no matter how you do it, you want to make sure the quilt you put on top is a little bit wider, like this Katabatic Gear quilt that is a long and wide quilt. That way you can completely cover the other quilt to make sure that you have double insulation from side to side. You can do this with any 2 quilts, and depending on their temperature ratings, you can get down to some pretty cold temperatures. In fact, I'll drop a link in the description that will give you an idea what 2 temperature ratings can achieve together. But even with layered quilts, there's still one really important factor that you simply cannot ignore. But first, I need to tell you about our sponsor, Garage Grown Gear. Garage Grown Gear is not like other retailers. They pride themselves on carrying small cottage brands that are making gear big companies won't. Like the quilts we're talking about today. If you go and look at big name companies, not very many of them are making quilts because they assume that it's too specialized, which is exactly why cottage companies exist, to make the stuff that the big brands won't. Garage Grown Gear is working hard to bring you all these small brands in one convenient place so that you can get the stuff that will make your trip that much better. Go check them out at garagegrowngear.com or use the links in the description. Okay, it doesn't matter how cold your sleeping bag or your quilt is rated to. It doesn't matter how many quilts you layer on top of one another. If you don't have the proper sleeping pad, you are still going to freeze. That's because when you lay inside your sleeping bag, all the insulation that is below you is going to get crushed under the weight of your body. If insulation can't trap air, it can't keep you warm. In fact, that is the whole reason why quilts don't have a back, because it's really just wasted insulation. Now, you could buy something like this Thermarest X-Therm that has the highest R value on the market at 6.9. This will keep you warm at the coldest temperatures, but it's not cheap at almost $250. And again, how often are you going to use it? Or just like the quilts, you can layer R value to get warmer rating. So I've got my Nemo insulated tensor here. It's got a really good R value of 4.2. That's good for spring and fall backpacking down to just about freezing. But if you want to go colder, you can actually layer it with a closed cell foam pad that has an R value of 2. And unlike quilt temp ratings, you can just simply add R value together. So the 4.2 of my tensor and the 2 of the closed cell foam pad will give you a combined R value of 6.2, which is perfect even for really cold temperatures. So the secret here is layering. Layering helps you get more versatility out of your gear. It doesn't matter if you're layering clothing to help you regulate warmth while you're on the move, or if you're layering quilts and sleeping pads to get more warmth out of them. Layering is the key to safe and warm winter camping. But do be careful, because when you're asleep, you're still going to need to keep your head warm. If you've got a sleeping bag under a quilt, the hood may function well enough to keep your head warm, but most quilts are not going to be long enough to pull them up over your head. So I recommend something like this down hood from Katabatic Gear. They've got 2 versions, the Wyndham and the Crestone. The Wyndham is good down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, while the Crestone is good down to about -40 degrees Fahrenheit. And the last thing you need is to make sure that you are protecting your down from getting wet. And once again, you can do that without spending a bunch of money, like I talk about in this video right here. Be sure to like, subscribe, and do all those other things. And as always, thanks for watching. Airplanes. I hate airplanes. Except for when I want to go someplace cool. I hate airplanes flying overhead when I'm camping.